Welcome back at WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively bringing the show back out on the road. The Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lobster Conrad Crabs this week in conjunction with our friends at Goodwill Industries as well as Window Nation, our newest sponsor. I'll be telling you tons and tons more about Window Nation as we get into the spring and the summer about getting windows repaired. Been a little while for me. So I went out into the window market and found my friends at Window Nation. So I'm glad to be a spokesperson for them, be telling you more about that. Luke's going to be telling you more about the fourth round. We have done a pretty comprehensive look at the totality of the draft. Certainly lots of look at the two first rounders, which when you say two first rounders, I don't know that we really believed that was going to be the case. We didn't think about it in terms of that and the totality of the draft. But all of this focus on the fourth round and the Peter King story and the Steelers drafting the other guy. The real story in the fourth round is they got a starter, right? They got a punter. And drafting a punter, and we've been up and down the mountain on this, from Greg Montgomery, the late great Greg Montgomery, arriving, and Kyle Richardson marrying a Dundalk girl, through Dave Zastidal, but then it kind of stopped, right? Like football coaches here, we haven't had a lot of coaches, we haven't had a lot of kickers, we haven't had a lot of punters,
and we're talking about someone that has been with the Ravens longer than John Harbaugh. I mean, think about that. Sam Cook played for Brian Billick, and that was a long time ago at this point. I mean, it really was. I mean, John, just got another contract extension.
Brian would agree with that, by the way. It was a long time ago.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're talking about someone who, as Eric said after day 3 of the draft and was asked about it, it's silly to say because it's a punter, and we make fun of punters and kickers. Maybe not so much here in Baltimore, but in general, we make fun of kickers as it pertains to football. But he spoke about how Sam Cook has been a fabric of this organization and is a guy who, made a Pro Bowl, had some other years where he could have made a Pro Bowl. And I know Jerry Rossberg, the longtime retired Ravens special teams coordinator, said Sam Cook, in addition to being a phenomenal punter, in his mind, the best holder in NFL history, which, by the way, is kind of important if you're talking about a kicker and Justin Tucker and a Hall of Fame career for him potentially, and all the things we talk about, all the superlatives we throw out there for Justin Tucker. If you don't have someone who can hold the ball consistently, if you don't have someone who can snap the ball consistently, then it doesn't do you much good. So for Sam Cook to do what he's done, to play 256 regular season games, more than any other player in Ravens history, which, you'd say, okay, it's a punter, but Ray Lewis played 17 years. Terrell Suggs played a really long time here in Baltimore as well. There have been some guys who played here for not just a decade, but well over a decade. So yeah, it is easier for a punter, for a kicker to do that. But for Sam to do what he's done over such a long period of time, thought it was appropriate for us to lead off a segment talking a little bit about him, what he's contributed to the organization. We'll see what happens in terms of how this is officially handled, but let's call a spade. You don't draft a punter in the 4th round with anything but designs of that guy being your guy now. And, whether the Ravens part with Sam sometime this week, sometime next month, or whether they have him stick around and do a competition, which I would not like. I think that's insulting to a guy. He knows what's happening here. Sam's going to be 40 this summer, and he's been doing it a long time. And whether it was this year with Jordan Stout or a punter next year or the year after that, we knew that this thing was not going to last forever. It doesn't for anyone, even kickers. So I think from that standpoint, a tip of the cap to Sam Cook, a guy I know, you and I have, we've done live shows together in Hampstead, and
there are very few guys in the history of this organization that have been consistently human and decent as Sam Cook. Sam Cook's a good guy. Sam Cook's has been a hell of a punter.
I was going to say.
And a good citizen and a good father and a good family guy. And a guy we've just go back and watch any of the videos with us, Sam Cook, on the snowy night up at Greenmount Station. Yeah. Just a good dude. Just a really good dude.
No question about it. And I mean, you said it, a good dude and a heck of a football player. And a football player. Look at the passes he threw over the years on fake punts. I mean, threw some really impressive balls. I mean, he's someone who wasn't just, didn't throw a wounded duck out there. Sam threw a spiral. You go to a Ravens game at any point over the last, at least since I've been covering the team full time in 2011, the Ravens have their 2 active quarterbacks, and then Sam Cook throwing passes during warmups, and not just throwing little dump offs to the flat, throwing long passes and throwing spirals and hitting guys in stride. Sam was an athlete, and he'd be the first to tell you in modest terms, but you ask him about what he did growing up, athletically speaking, and he played sports and was active and did lots of things in that way. And we've seen him throw passes, we've seen him run the football, not too often, a couple times, but an athlete and someone who has been very important to their success. And I get it, he's a punter. And look, Jordan Stout, who Eric, I know, said that would be the only punter he would have drafted. You can certainly question fourth round selection of a punter. Jordan Stout's he has huge shoes to fill for that to, one, be a good pick, and for that to not be something that's going to leave the Ravens in a compromised position, punting the ball, holding for field goals and extra points. So it's a really important job. It's something they scouted very heavily. It's something that I don't think they do in haste, knowing how much Sam has meant to the organization, but it's the latest sign that nothing lasts forever. And, they'll go on. Justin Tucker will go on. It'll be, it's not the wolf pack anymore. He's the lone wolf now because Morgan Cox, left last year, Sam Cook now. So it's definitely a changing of the guard, but, I think Jordan Stout expectations are very high. Whether you're drafted in the fourth round, fifth round, sixth round, priority free agent, acquired via trade, whatever it might be, I don't care what resources were used for you. You step into the role that a guy has had since 2006. There's a lot of, there are quite a few expectations for you to do a good job, and the Ravens are confident in him, but certainly want to give Sam Cook his just due as he goes out the door at some point here, whenever it becomes official.
All right, let's go through these picks here and these names and who these players are, and not that they'll become household names here, but they will be tied together. 6 picks, the only time it's ever happened in the history of the draft, chronicled in the room by Peter King over the weekend. I'm shocked Eric let anybody in the room. He won't let me in the room, but I don't really want to be in the room. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it'd be fun to be a hoot one time to do it or whatever, but I feel like I'm in everybody's room every year with the draft. There's cameras everywhere. I know what everybody's wearing. I know what the coffee looks like. I'm a little bit, I don't want to say bored with it. It's overwrought, dude. This Vegas and magicians and Ed Marinero taking the stage for 3.5 minutes and just all of it. But by the time it gets to this point, the people in Vegas are worn out. The third day of the draft, nobody goes. Like, it's not a thing other than for, well, nerds like us who, wonder where the next Matt Judon or the next Dallas Thomas or the next Terrell Davis is coming from through all of this. But that's what made it interesting. The Ravens made the draft fun on Saturday.
No question, just by the sheer number of players they picked. And to your point, yeah, if I were in Vegas for the draft day 3, I'd be at a poker table somewhere. I wouldn't be watching day 3 picks being announced. But it really, you look at the Ravens, and we've talked about the 6th, 4th round picks. We've talked about the hypothetical value, knowing the probability, the what history suggests about these picks. But you go through and you see a rhyme or reason for just about everything they did. And for me, you have to start with the big man, 6'8", 380 pounds out of Minnesota, Daniel.
Hey, hold on. You just sounded like Michael Buffer. You sounded like
that's how big he is.
Parts unknown.
Right. He's not quite Andre the Giant, but he's like Kevin Nash, Big Daddy Cool Diesel back in the day. But Daniel Fa'alele, their offensive tackle that they selected out of Minnesota, a guy who's only been playing football since 2017. Raw. I have no expectation that he's going to be a factor for them in 2022.
Well, we've been through a bunch of these, right? These really big Jared Gaither and Ja Reed, right? Some of these just gigantic men. Bryant McKinney was a gigantic man.
Sure. And I saw some people have drawn comparisons to Orlando Brown. Orlando Brown, let's give him credit. He was, as much as everyone hammered on him for the combine testing and all of that, he was a technician. You hear him talk, Daniel Fa'alele played very well at Minnesota, given his raw lack of experience. but he's more of a project. And I don't mean that as disrespectful that I don't like the pick. I think you love that.
He's a Harbaugh family project, really, right? Literally.
He is. I mean, that's what was kind of funny. He ended up going to Minnesota after Jim Harbaugh had really, recruited him. Kind of said, "Hey, play football. Come to Michigan," and winds up at Minnesota. So, but he did well for himself. Again, not a guy that I'm looking at to be on the radar in 2022. I think in an ideal scenario, maybe next year after that, he could be your starting right tackle. And my goodness, he's a mammoth of a man. Certainly the weight's going to be, that's going to be a question. I don't know if he can really play long-term 6'8", 380, probably needs to shed, 20, 25 pounds, whatever it might be. But, you watch the tape and you see the potential, and you see a guy that doesn't even necessarily play with a mean streak, but still moves people. And that just speaks to get him some more experience, get him confident and up to speed with what he needs to continue to work on at the next level. It's different playing in the NFL than the Big Ten. It's one thing I remind everyone about looking at college tape, but you see the potential, and my goodness, you just see the size of the guy alone. And it's enticing to think about him, what he could be next year, year after that, year after that. I mean, certainly a guy that you take early in the fourth round, you're hoping he can blossom into a starting player for you. And if he can be their starting right tackle next year after that, then great. That's another position you don't have to worry about. But in the meantime, you saw Minnesota. He actually played wildcat quarterback at one point, threw a pass, threw a touchdown, and ran the ball on a couple of occasions. I don't know how much you're going to see that, but hey, if you need an extra fullback, you want to truly run a jumbo package, then I wouldn't be shocked to see him at some point. But again, in the big picture, looking for this to be more of a development year for him. But you can't teach being 6'8" and 380 pounds. And for him to do what he did at Minnesota after having not played football basically his entire life, impressive. And certainly someone worth taking a fourth round pick to see if you can develop him into a starting right tackle in the NFL.
Well, the amazing thing about all of this is these picks happen so quickly, right? So to say, will the punter be there? Will the wide receiver be there? Can we get the tight end that we want? Do we want two tight ends? Like all of that factored in. And again, when we're talking about the Ravens, and I've known Eric a long, long time, I mean, they're scrimmaging everything out there for weeks. And probably do it in front of the owner at this point, because the owner's invested in it again. He's back, as they would say. He's interested. He's there. He's all in on fourth round draft picks and stuff that gets his juices flowing as a billionaire who, I don't know what his hobbies are, but I think this is his hobby at this point in his life. So good for him that he's involved. But these picks and how they happen and where you value them, I thought it was a very interesting piece that Peter King wrote, and I'm going to pick his brain as well about how you value these, where you think the punter needs to be, why you take the tackle first. Like all of that is fascinating when you're given this gift, blessing, once in a lifetime opportunity to say, hey, in the middle of the draft, we're just going to stop it. And you're going to get to pick all the players for a little while. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say it's once in a lifetime, because they picked 5 in the 2016 draft in the fourth round. But it's unique, and you have to have a plan. And as much as we hear the same cliches, the same mantras every year, best player available, we stay true to our board. There's more to it than that, because their positions are valued differently. There's intel in terms of what other teams like. I mean, I know Eric spoke to Peter King in terms of talking about punters, and the Ravens had sniffed around with a couple other teams being interested in Jordan Stout potentially, and taking a punter at that point in the draft. So, you're always trying to anticipate. And to your point, you're trying to scrimmage out the scenarios as much as you can, but at the same time, you're still targeting players. You're still trying to address need. I mentioned Fa'alele, and even though he's not going to fit an immediate need, I don't think he's going to be the guy that steps in at left tackle if Ronnie Stanley's not right come week one. I certainly don't believe that. But at the same time, you do have to target some goals and some positional needs that you need to address, and that's where you come to the second of their 6 fourth-round picks, Jalen Armour-Davis from Alabama, a guy who struggled to stay on the field, which I know a lot of Ravens fans, and understandably so, kind of cringe at the idea of, wait a second, you just had this historically terrible season as it relates to injuries. And the first corner that you take in the draft is a guy who struggled to stay on the field for the Crimson Tide and only played one full season at Alabama. That I understand that. At the same time, there's a reason why he's available in the fourth round, and that's why. But if you go and look back at what Jalen Armour-Davis looked like for Alabama last year, he looked like the kind of guy who has a chance to develop into a starting outside corner in the NFL. Lots of comparisons were made, so I'm not, not speaking as though I'm, brilliant in saying this, but you look at the size, you look at how he profiles, you look at the fact that he didn't have a ton of starting experience at Alabama. It reminds you a little bit of another fourth round corner the Ravens selected out of Alabama 4 years ago, Anthony Averett, who this guy's going to come in and kind of replace, when you think about what expectations are going to be. It's not going to be a starter. I mean, they have Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters to play on the outside, but they need some outside corner depth. They do not have much of that right now. As much as you can look at their safeties, you can look at Brandon Stevens, who's more that hybrid, played corner in college, moved to safety last year. Those guys are more of your slot options. Kyle Hamilton could be a slot corner for the Ravens in various sub packages, but you need some boundary guys. You need some outside corners, and they're light there. So Jalen Armour-Davis at 6'1", 195. He's not huge, but he's certainly big enough that he profiles and has good feet, can cover speed on the outside. He's got a chance to, you're hoping he doesn't have to play a whole lot in 2022, but Anthony Averett, even as a rookie, was thrown into a little bit of action that year if you look back, and he held up okay for them.
Well, the replacing part of these guys like Averett that were like, roses that never bloomed and they're in other places, and what you really want when you're paying your corners, double-digit millions of dollars to be corners, how much you need at that 3, 4, or 5. When you got to go deep and everybody's 5 wide on offense and running around and playing ping pong, you got to have guys out there. And it's not about the linebackers as much at that point. It's much more about another safety that they took a gander on in the first round. So they know the value of the back end with what the Cleveland Browns and the Bengals, and maybe it's someday the Steelers are going to try to do to them.
Well, the rest of the league too. It's the name of the game. Yeah, it's the name of the game. I mean, Kansas City for a year, Buffalo. I mean, go down the list. I mean, every team has this. And as much as we can talk about the contrast that the Ravens are offensively to those teams, you've got to account for it on defense. And it's why they have invested so much on the back end of their secondary. And I've talked about this with you for years from an analytics standpoint. The analytical approach of valuing coverage before pressure doesn't mean you don't want a pass rush. And certainly we can still talk about them questions at outside linebacker and Tyus Bowser coming back from injury and David Ajabo coming back from injury now. More upside, but still another question mark there. They're going to have to cover because they don't have those slam dunk all pro edge rushers. You're hoping Ajabo can maybe bloom into that. You're hoping that Odafe Owe takes a big step forward in year 2, but you're going to have to cover. And that's why you drafted Kyle Hamilton. That's why you signed Marcus Williams. That's why you're really hoping that Jalen Armour-Davis, as a 4th round oft-injured quarterback or cornerback in college, can stay healthy. The reason why he was available in the 4th round is because of the injuries. He probably would have been, a guy who might have been a 2nd round pick otherwise. I don't know that for sure. It's the reality. So in the 4th round, you're talking about imperfect prospects, right? I mean, part of the reason why we talk about the success rate and the probability of these guys hitting, and we kind of make fun of things they said about the 2016 4th round and it didn't really come to fruition. These guys are available in the 4th round for a reason. There's something wrong with them. There's some perception, whether it's true or not, whether it ultimately hinders them or not at the next level, there's some legitimate reason why they weren't taken until the 4th round. So in the case of Armour-Davis, it's because of the injuries. Had a knee injury, had some other leg issues. Even last year, his first year where he was really a starter at Alabama, missed time late in the season. So it's a big question mark there. And the cynic would say, oh, great, you just drafted the next Tavon Young. And you know what? That might end up being how it turns out. But in the 4th round, you're certainly, because you go back to positional value, if you're only taking, quote, safe players in the 4th round, guess what? you're not getting much ceiling there. You're not getting much potential. You're getting some guys that, okay, I might be able to play on special teams for you. Maybe they fill in a little bit in an emergency situation, but you're not swinging for the fences with safe prospects in the fourth round. So you need to diversify, right? It's like investments, right? You have some that are a little riskier, but that there's a higher end reward there, potential. And then there are other things that you want to be a little bit safer about. But in the case of Jalen Armour-Davis in the fourth round, what he can do potentially being an outside corner at the next level makes a lot of sense. You hope he doesn't have to play a whole lot this year, but knowing that Marcus Peters is coming back from an ACL and is in the last year of his deal, that this is the kind of pick that if this guy's good, he could be a starter for them next year or the year after that. So that's what you're looking to. And in the meantime, as we saw late last year, you need depth, and the Ravens lost a lot of that depth, and some of it by choice. When you say goodbye to Tavon Young, and I agreed with them making that move, but you're hoping that this kid can come in and along with the other cornerback that they drafted, who is probably a little more of a project. That's why he was end of the fourth round, Demarion Williams. He's a little more of a slot guy, but these are guys that you're trying to rebuild your depth chart, because a year ago at this time, we were talking about corner being an abundance, an embarrassment of riches for this organization, and it went away. Jimmy Smith gets hurt, and Tavon Young just doesn't look like the same guy he had been before. And Anthony,
it's almost like pitching on a baseball team when it just kind of evaporates, right?
It really is. It really is. And I mean, corner is such a difficult position. I mean, the change of direction, and you're out on an island. I mean, your athleticism is key. I mean, you can play at less than 100% at some other positions and still play at a really high level. At corner, I think that's really tough to do. I mean, maybe if you have an elbow issue,
any lower body injury, to quote a hockey statistic there.
I mean, ankles, knees, hips. I mean, you just need so much fluidity. You need that all of it. I mean, it's really, on defense, it's the most difficult position to play. I don't think I'm talking out of turn saying that. So you need them, and they're going to break. You mentioned pitching; they all break at the end of the day. We know the injury rate in the NFL gets to 100% eventually, right? Or guys just, the unicorns retire, I suppose. But, in the case of the two corners that they took, again, not guys that you feel confident if they have to play right away, but guys that you hope can get it acclimated in your program and become a factor for you from a depth standpoint this year. And then, over the next couple of years, see what happens. Maybe one of them blossoms into a starting caliber corner for you.
Luke Jones is here. We are recapping all things Ravens in a lively weekend. Dennis Colatzos and I will be recapping that as well. I want to give a shout out to Coons Baltimore Ford, Security Boulevard. Of course, Dennis has been with us for many, many years, and he'll be here on Thursday from 3 until 5 with the former Sunday Sports Voice, now the Dennis Colatzos Show, also heard on Sunday morning. So we're going to be recapping the draft all week, talking a lot about the World Cup bid for not just for the U.S., but for Baltimore specifically, in a couple of weeks from now, potentially having games here. So mixing it up, but they're going to be bringing all these youngsters in here. We talked about Sam Cook. We talked about strengths, weaknesses, all that. The question after the weekend now, the thing you'll be writing about and the thing people will be talking about is who is going to play wide receiver and where are the running backs in regard to their health. And these are the skill position players. And, of course, the elephant in the room is Lamar's contract at this point, right?
No question about it. And that's going to continue to be. And, as you and I discussed in the wee hours of Friday morning after Marquise Brown had been traded, what impact does that have on him? Not just from a football standpoint, but, his mindset, how his attitude toward the organization. Marquise Brown made it clear in a couple of interviews that he did that, this wasn't something that just came up. It's something that, we saw frustration from him in year two, and he acknowledged that. He spends a lot of times with Lamar Jackson. You can't tell me that, even before it came to the point that he requested a trade, that there weren't discussions. How much of Marquise Brown's attitudes and opinions on this offense does Lamar Jackson potentially agree with? It doesn't mean Lamar wants out. I want to be clear about that, but they talked about these things, right? And I'm sure
well,
there was
the idea is to get the ball down the field and throw the ball over everybody's head, and Lamar's the quarterback and he's the wide receiver, and they don't want to do that more often, or they've used a first-round pick on you and think you're not the guy to do it, and they've targeted you 167 times in a run-first offense. I don't know, and your cousin's Antonio Brown, and at some point, all of these kids think they're all about business, right? Whether it's they're going to be an agent, they're going to be a rapper, they're going to be a movie star, whatever it's going to be. I've watched it for 31 years. At the end of the day, the coaches really do know more, especially if they're winning coaches. Guys like Harbaugh, hard to argue with these cats in general as to what they're going to do and how they're going to do it at a way higher level, where Bisciotti and Eric DeCosta are sitting in Jupiter dreaming all of this up. And if you're not going to play nice, and especially if you want $20 million a year, but I don't know what he wanted, because if it's about them taking the top off the offense and throwing the ball, it kind of says they don't think Lamar can do that. It's kind of what they say to me, or they don't want Lamar doing that, because they put a lot of stock into this kid for him to go do it. He's certainly an NFL player, despite the optics of how small he is and like all of that. He's a damn fine wide receiver, right? I mean, we could say that. I mean, they give him a first-round pick for him, all of that. But what happened here with that it's a little bit of a head-scratcher to say maybe he's just the wrong guy, but he was attached to the quarterback. And I've watched sports a long time. And when I've watched bunkies leave and buddies and baby brothers and big brother, like it has an effect. It really, there's a human effect to that.
It does, and it can be a positive in the long run in some cases, and other times it can be it can be detrimental. It can be something.
Ray Lewis and Ed Reed were not attached to the hip around here as much as they were attached to the hip in Canton and other places, right?
Well, Ray Lewis and Ed Reed were attached at the hip at times, and then other times not so much, right? I mean, and you can certainly speak to that much better than I can, having been around the team at that point in time, and I only covered them at the end.
Look, when guys are walking into the locker room together, out of the locker room together, or seen on social media together, are over watching The Bachelor at Flacco's house, you know where the alliances and friendships were, that if Dennis Pitta and Joe Flacco would have been separated in year 4, Joe probably would have been pissed about that and would have had no problem going in and talking about it, because Joe never had a problem being flippant. I don't know where Lamar stands on all of that, but Lamar's the most important guy there. And if anything, at this point, they're going to coddle him. I mean, like literally, they're trying to sign him, right? They're going to give him what he wants. This is a really, I don't know what to make of it. We're not on the inside of it like that, but it is different. It's certainly something to be watched.
No question about it. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see how they proceed. And I think this is a nice segue into, they drafted two tight ends in the 4th round. And I'm going to be writing about it at BaltimorePositive.com. But a lot of what they did over the course of this draft makes you feel, getting back to 2019 and what they did then, and Mark Andrews and Hayden Hurst and Nick Boyle and the tight ends, and the receivers weren't emphasized quite as much. Charlie Kolar looks like a Mark Andrews clone coming out of college. Now, don't think he's going to be an all-pro like Mark Andrews, but can be that understudy. And then the other guy, Isaiah Likely, he's the epitome of a tweener. Too small to be a tight end, a full-time tight end in the NFL. Probably not dynamic enough, athletically speaking, to be a wide receiver. But if there's an unconventional talent to be had and placed into an unconventional offense that, yes, does still throw the football. It's not as though they run every single play.
Well, Darren Waller did okay in the end.
But he was never a factor with what they. But he was never a factor with this. He was already on the way out at that point. But Isaiah Likely, be interesting to see how that plays out. They still need another receiver. I'm not going to let them off the hook with that. Believe me, I'm not. I'm just not. And people can get mad and say, "Oh, they're going to be okay." You don't trade your top receiver and not replace him and not think that there's going to be some major questions there. But it is going to be fascinating to see how this plays out. And again, you see maybe a little more of a push back towards the tight end position after getting away from that the last year or two.
Luke Jones is Baltimore Luke. You can find him out on the internet anywhere the internet is served. The Orioles making news this week, despite winning a couple games over the weekend, moving some players around locally where we can go out and get a sniff of the baby birds. We'll have more of that, as well as the Maryland Crab Cake Tour coming to Conrad's this Friday in Perry Hall. It's all brought to you by the Maryland Lottery and our friends at Goodwill, as well as our friends at Window Nation. Be telling you more. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore positive.